Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I think it's from the conversations today, it's been really exciting to be part of, I guess, a conversation around food and agriculture, two things that I'm particularly passionate about. Where I'd like to start, I guess, is where Michael Hahn started. We've kind of reconnected last night after having similar conversations around these things probably about 5 or 6 years ago in the Sustainable Food Lab, and since then, Michael and I have kind of, I guess, stayed in orbit. But it was interesting hearing him talk today when he was talking about the food price crisis in terms of where things are at today. And that's where I wanted to start, that our food system is creaking. The things that Michael mentioned, the billion people that we have hungry, most of those people are people who grow food for our global food system. That's very weird, as Michael was saying, because on the flip side of the starved, we have the stuffed, where we have 1 billion of us dying of excess, of over too many calories in our diet, and our food system kind of creaking under the weight of a poor distribution, unequal distribution, getting food from where it's grown to where it needs to be, and people giving their lives to growing cash crops or commodities that unfortunately we don't value and pay enough for. But if we think this, where we're sitting at the moment with those issues, Michael and even Ben, when he was talking about the limits of where we are, peak everything, the boundaries for the planet, whether it's 2030, 2040, 2050, the looming crisis is perhaps even more scary. And I know John Crawford's going to talk a little bit more about some of the scenarios later today. But this quote from Julian Cribb's book, The Coming Famine, if you haven't had a look at it, please do, really sums it up quite nicely, I think, in terms of the challenge that we have. Just to figure out, with all the peak stuff biting, with everything kind of pushing in a different direction in this perfect storm, how do we feed more people than we ever have before? Now, continuing this theme of hope that we've had today, that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, well, there is hope, and the thing that's typically wheeled out by FAO, by World Food Programme, by UNDP, various things to say, well, what's going to help? Who's going to save us to some extent as we go through this? And the answer that we continually get is small-scale farmers. Michael mentioned there's 1 billion of them in the world, and at the moment they are involved in food production. Failing to feed themselves quite often in terms of their own local food needs, but providing things for us, largely traded commodities, coffee, cocoa, cotton, wheat, grain, soy, palm oil, all these kinds of things that small-scale farmers are involved in. But my question today, and really wanted to talk about, is, well, how? How are these guys the saviours? How are small-scale farmers the heroes that we need for this current crisis and for the future crisis that's coming? And I guess that's where I've spent most of my last 8 years of my life, working in Fairtrade and working with small-scale farmers and small-scale farming organisations. And I think really that's fundamental to me in terms of what the Fairtrade system, what Via Campesina, what these movements are showing, is that the way this is going to work and the hope that we have is not in individual farmers. It's in collectives, it's in cooperatives, it's in farmer businesses, farmer organisations. It's in people coming together to be able to achieve economies of scale. But importantly, I think, and this is the message, one of the key messages I'd like to leave you with today, it's about a changing power relationship in our food supply chain. If we think that small-scale farmers are going to help us solve the crisis of being able to feed ourselves within this same way that power relationships work in the food supply chain now, we're mistaken, in my view. I think what we're talking about here is a change in the power relationship, empowering small farmer organisations, allowing them to move up the global value chain, where they're playing a role that's not just about growing food at the bottom of supply chains and selling food into global commodity systems and stuff that they grow ending up in Woolworths. I think what we're talking about is them playing a multiplicity of roles in their own community and on the global stage as farmers within farmer organisations, where they're empowered and they're taking action. They're able to solve their local problems because they have the resources to do that. They're able to feed themselves, look after themselves, have more resiliency within their own community through collaborating and working together. And because they have access to things that they don't have right now because they're part of a farmer organisation, that they'll be actually able to increase the production and the quality of the production of the food that they grow for us, that then will come through to our communities. So that's really what I want to talk about today, small farmers enabling heroes, and how do we do that, and what have we learned from what's happened for thousands of years of successful farming organisations and farming communities and that have come together. So this here is the collection of symbols that the Food and Agriculture Organisation kind of uses to represent what they do. And I think this is a really interesting illustration, because what it's done is it's pulled together all these symbols of all the different parts of the food system and all the different parts and the things that are involved in getting food from farm to plate. It involves, pick a few things out. We're talking about seafood, we're talking about forestry, we're talking about banks, talking about manufacturing. There's a whole range of things within this overall supply chain. And being a farmer and being a farmer and having a role of only growing food is such a small part of this global value chain. And what I think you see through small farmer organisations and farmer cooperatives and farmer businesses coming together is what can happen when you're actually empowering small farmers to move up the global value chain. I want to give you a couple of examples. Small farmer organisations as businesses. One of the really successful stories, and one of the stories that I love, is about Kwapa in Ghana. They started with about 10,000 cocoa farmers. They've grown to about 45,000, 50,000 today. They're a business. They do all the stuff of actually growing the cocoa, but also processing, trading, building trade relationships, all that kind of stuff as a business. But one of the most important things for them over the last few years, over the last 5 in particular, cocoa prices have been quite volatile. They've been up high recently. But one of the things that's really benefited them is they're a 1/3 owner of a chocolate bar that's sold. So they own the end product. So there are farmers down here and a farming organisation growing cocoa, but they also own Divine Chocolate, which sells chocolate all throughout UK and Europe, into the US, and it's just come to Australia about in the last 3 or 4 weeks. You might be finding more on shelf soon. But getting the dividends out of the success of that business back into their community has been able to help them deal with the volatility of commodity prices. It's been able to enable them to continue to invest in education, to invest in tackling child labour issues in their community in a time where there's been so much volatility around commodity prices. And I don't know whether you're aware, but one of the things that we do in a global financial crisis or any kind of depression, a lot of businesses really struggle. Lipstick, lingerie, chocolate sales go through the roof. So for these guys, they're growing the cocoa, but their chocolate sales during the GFC were taking off all around the world. And so they've been able to get, I guess, more profitability out of the business at that end, even though there was problems at their production end of actually growing the cocoa and trading. I had the pleasure of meeting a young woman from Kwapa about 5 years ago now. And what her story was that she never really wanted to be a farmer. And this is, I guess, one of the issues we were talking about before, about that's true in Australia as well. But what has happened in their community is it's not just about the people growing the cocoa anymore. There's a whole range of jobs for people to do. She's their marketing manager. So she got sent to university because of the money that these guys were making as a cooperative, and her dad in the farming cooperative to send her to uni, and she's come back and she's working for the cooperative, not as a farmer, but as marketing, and created all these other opportunities within that farming organisation for young people and engaging young people. And if you know anything about cocoa industry and cocoa production, the profile, which is probably writ large across so many commodity crops, the age of the farmer is just going up and up and up, and it's not something that young people want to do. I was just talking to a colleague of mine in Africa last week, in Malawi, and he's saying, like, young Africans and people, especially young people in Malawi, none of them talking about being farmers in the future. That's not what they want to do. Same last week, I think it was a report out of the US, which is talking about the inability for farmers in the US to find the next generation of farmers to come through. I think it's because we've undervalued that, and we've relegated them to the role at the bottom of supply chains. When you're talking about farmer organisations, farmer cooperatives as businesses, and there's these opportunities for them to do and to be so much more than just being seen at the bottom of supply chains, where they've got the ability to influence their community, to participate in the economy writ large, that creates a different kind of conversation. And this drift that Michael mentioned and Ben picked up on, around 50 million of these people moving to slums every year, that situation gets reversed when there's actually livelihoods and futures of people in these communities where they live. Another example, apart from Kwapakuku, is another coffee growing cooperative in Tanzania, where over a period of 10 years, they took the extra money they were making and they identified, well, we're just growing coffee now, but there's more money up the value chain. So there was a instant coffee facility not far from where they were growing coffee. Over a period of 10 years, they took their money and bought shares until eventually they owned majority share of it. They took it over, managed it. They began to generate money out of selling instant coffee as opposed to just raw green coffee, which brought a whole bunch more money into their community than they were able to do a whole bunch more things. So this power of farmers growing food, yes, that's obviously the core proposition, and investing in productivity and yields and farming techniques is really important. But I think a key step here is that the farmer as business and as business person and participating within businesses that have much more scope and are moving up the value chain and therefore have greater resiliency. One of the other things that happens, and that we see happening with farmer organisations through Latin America and Asia and Africa, is acting as financiers. Because they've got a source of money coming into their community, they end up playing the role of providing microloans and microfinance to people in their community, whether it be entrepreneurs and innovators who are trying to start new things, whether people in their community to borrow money to buy new equipment, whether as a cooperative they need to buy new equipment. But what's also interesting is beginning to provide superannuation for people who have worked for that farmer organisation. In the absence of governments or there being any mandatory thing in most of these countries, they're actually able to help look after people later in life, and also providing insurance. Access to insurance and access to credit is a huge barrier for small farmers, being able to do very much take a lot of risk, trying to get your truck from where you process all your goods to the port. You need that insured. What if it never gets there? And most people don't have any money to be able to pay for that insurance. So you have this role of small farmer organisations and small farmer cooperatives, businesses, being able to be financiers within their community. Another thing I think is really important is the role of community leaders and actually playing a role in transforming how communities operate. Cafe Femenino in Peru is this amazing project that is now across about 10 cooperatives of coffee growers. Uniquely, they're all women who are growing the coffee and who are owning the land, which in Peru, which is the place where it first started, highly unusual. Changing the role of women in these communities by having them at the centre of farming, at the centre of business, and engaging in that, changing the attitudes within their community towards women. If you know anything about international development, you'll know that women is the best investment ever in terms of tackling poverty in communities. So this kind of thing, we're actually bringing women together, they're being successful in their own business, but changing that relationship across their community is very, very impactful. So we have this role, and I think that's one of the things that I would say in terms of farmer organisations and farmer cooperatives. That you have potential. You're not just growing food. You're financiers, you're business people, you're community leaders, you're logistics, you're technical. All those kind of opportunities begin to come into play. And overall, I think when we're looking back at that the food crisis and the creaking of the food system. There's real opportunity here, but it requires a different way of valuing people in the supply chain. It requires a different way of valuing those people that are producing and actually supporting small-scale farmers to move up the value chain, to actually achieve more together, to have more power, to pay more money, to get access to more of the resources. And it can't be a situation of business as usual where retailers and brands sitting at this end of the value chain here in a place like Australia are making the money and squeezing down on farmers as you're just providing the raw material and not valuing that. And I think that's something that's as applicable here as it is in the countries where I've kind of been privileged to be working with over the last few years with small farmer organisations. And I think the other important thing then, as one of the things I said at the very beginning, is that many of these people who are producing food are also hungry. through these organisations, are able to support each other. They're able to invest in local innovation and local development and actually look after feeding themselves as well as providing those very important cash crops that are the essence of the livelihoods for billions of, 1.2 billion people in the world. Just to finish up, I think in terms of this, and in terms of small-scale farmers, I'm sure many of you know far better than I do about this, this erosion really of what used to be very common in Australia of the agricultural cooperative amongst farmers. Mostly that's disappeared off our landscape. Generally speaking, I think collective and community approaches to most things, not just farming in Australia, have been undermined and been lessened over the last 20 or 30 years. I expect that's going to make a resurgence. I think technology and the resource scarcity and these kind of things, collaborative consumption, these things I think are going to push us back into thinking about how we operate collectively. Next year is the Australian Year of the Farmer. It's also the International Year of the Cooperatives. If you wanted, if you have some time and have some interest, have a look at Plunkett Foundation, the Troodos Bank in the UK. Over the last kind of 3 or 4 years in particular, there's been this resurgence of rural cooperative businesses built around farming and food production in the UK. Plunkett Foundation's been investing time and investing money. Troodos Bank has looked at where they should put their money and what's a good investment these days and gone, you know what, we reckon that probably investing in businesses that are going to be able to feed people over the next 20 years is probably a good place to put our money. So let's actually put our money into local, sustainable, organic food production in our own backyard. We don't have that happening here yet. I think that's something that I would love to see happen here in Australia, to create those kind of financial institutions that are valuing those kinds of approaches. And I think next year gives an opportunity to perhaps think and have some more of these conversations. And certainly I think, as we celebrate Australian Year of the Farmer next year, we need to think about our place in this global movement, see what's happening, make sure how we interact is supporting the development of these small-scale farmers worldwide, but also be thinking about that here, particularly opportunities for involving Indigenous communities, and something that I'm very passionate about and involved with some Indigenous fair trade projects getting off the ground. So I'll leave you with the message that, yes, I think there's definitely hope and there's definitely the potential for small-scale farmers to help us with this crisis that we have now and that we're approaching. It does require a change in the power relationship. It does require small farmers coming together, cooperatives, businesses, and it does require us to value what they deliver and what they give to us beyond just being at the bottom of supply chains and supplying us with commodities. Thank you.